Good morning,
Morning.
Professor Emeritus Siri Hettige. It's an honor for me to welcome you to my Kathikawa program, sir. And there's a special reason that I want you here today, because given what is happening in Sri Lanka right now, with all, many young people out on the roads asking for change, someone my age was reminded very starkly of things that happened in our lives before. I was too young in 1971 to remember the first youth insurgency, but I do remember very well what happened in 88, 89. I was still, just out of school then. And the fact that youth come out to ask for change is nothing unfamiliar to Sri Lanka. And we also saw, especially in the 88, 89 case, with the JVP asking for state power, nothing less, the disaster that occurred for both the government sector people and the JVP youth who died, in their thousands, because the repression was quite violent, unlike, I think, in the 71 situation. So Professor Hettige, something that I noticed now is that there is a fundamental difference in the way the youth are asking for change. One is in the organization of the youth who have come out, because from the beginning they have said there is no leader here. It's just normal young people asking for change. They said that. Secondly, they have also been non-violent so far. Now, on May 9th, we saw violence being leashed on them. And we also saw violence spreading out in the country. But it's my personal opinion, it's an opinion, that the people who were protesting may not necessarily have been those who did that violence. It was so organized, so planned, so simultaneous. But we are not getting there, sir. Right? My question to you is, as someone who had studied Sri Lankan society for a long time, what are the differences or similarities, sir, that you see between what's happening today in Gulf-Face, right, and the youth uprisings that we had seen in the past? We'll start there, sir.
Yes, to start with, I want to emphasize two things. One is that when we talk about youth, we are not talking about a monolithic constituency. Youth, constituencies as complex and diverse as any other segment of society, and that is number one. Number two, youth as a sociological category is a product of society and the wider environment. When I say the wider environment, as you know, we are no longer isolated in this country. We are very much connected to the rest of the world, in spite of the fact there are serious difficulties of really relating to the rest of the world for many people today because of various, last 2 years we had the COVID, which basically restrained us from moving around, not only within the country, but also across the country, across the countries. So the point is that we have to really look at, who is really participating in various protest movements. One thing, of course, as you already mentioned, youth uprisings are not new to Sri Lanka. We have seen it several times, but in particular, 1971 JVP-led uprising, and then, of course, later, the 1988-89 situation, when the same youth movement, participated in a major uprising at that time. And of course, in between, we have seen how, and also thereafter, of course, young people from other communities have also come forward with their own grievances with their own perspectives and have really contributed to, let's say, youth activism, if you like, and that eventually, as you know, led to nearly 30 years of violent conflict in Sri Lanka that really has had a huge impact on the country, and I think that is where we are. So
I'm going to disturb you there for a minute, sir. One thing, which a mistake I also made. Somehow we forget that the ethnic problem and the 30-year war was also part of the youth revolt, different ethnicity. So I'm glad you pointed that out to me, and we saw the results of that as well. So I'm glad you corrected that for me. And I also wanted to tell that when we say youth, I have taken this book as my primary questioning material to you. You had edited this, Unrest or Revolt, and this was in the 1990s, based on a conference that you had right after the 88, 89, the problems we had, and you and Professor Younggood and other academics had analyzed what had happened. Now, the reason I went to this book is because what interests me at the moment is to find links between what happened in the past and what's happening now. And what you said is so absolutely valid, because even the youth unrest in the North, which we have conveniently, at least the later generation, conveniently put it as an ethnic problem, was actually youth uprising, youth revolt, asking for a better deal. So I'm glad you corrected me on that. Yes, as you say, youth can be divided according to ethnicity, which is what happened very much in Sri Lanka when the war started. And it can be divided in many other ways, like caste, class, and social stratification as well. Please continue, sir. Yes.
Yes, I think in the modern world, we are talking about two types of politics. We are talking about, on the one hand, class politics, and then on the other, we talk about identity politics. Now, these are things that have been changing over time, and these changes have had an impact on young population in Sri Lanka in a significant way. And of course, it's not only political changes that really matter here, demographic changes, and then the social change that has taken place in Sri Lanka under different circumstances. Now, what we have seen when you look, at youth politics in this country, there is a kind of a transition from what I call class politics to identity politics, but not entirely, because it depends on who you are, how you identify yourself, in terms of caste and ethnic and other divisions that you have in society. Now, the point here is that in the 1971 uprising, you saw class politics dominating. And you can understand why it is so, because you see, at that time, we had this division between underprivileged youth and privileged youth, urban and rural, and so on and so forth, and that was quite important. So at that time, you see, young people were influenced by certain ideological forces. In particular, in the case of Sri Lanka, we had, at the time of independence, the country's political, let's say, forces divided between, class politics on the one hand and, identity politics on the other. So the young people were more tilted towards, class politics in 1977, because they were influenced by, let's say, political parties and groups that were very much, influenced by, let's say, class ideology and class politics. And that was also, of course, quite understandable, because at that time, the young population was growing because of population growth. I mean, our population growth was phenomenal. I mean, we started in this country with, I mean, the first census conducted in 1871 with a population of just over 2 million in the whole country. And, you know, the numbers might have been, you know, bit here and there, but on the other hand, it was the first systematic census conducted in the country. And then we had the second, I mean, the census that I looked at, and that was in just before independence, when we had a population of over 6 million. So you can see 3 times. And then in 1971 census recorded 12 million. And then in 81, you know, we had a population of 18 million and so on. And you know the population today.
In a way, it is also the success story of a welfare state, which had the medicine and, you know, the infant mortality rate and everything going down. Yeah. So in a way, it's a success story of the Sri Lankan medical scene. But it also meant that everyone was, you know, living. There were much more people living in this country. So it's a success story in one sense, and the fact that the population absolutely exploded very, very quickly post-independence.
I saw it as I didn't see it as a negative at all, because Sri Lanka, you know, has a fairly, you know, fairly vibrant landmass. And you know our climatic conditions and so on were quite favorable for population growth. And as you rightly mentioned, you know, we improved our social and economic conditions, you know, very, very steadily, you know, towards the end of the British rule. Like, for instance, it is important to recognize the fact that, you know, the first medical school in this country was established way back in the mid-19th century. I mean, 1864, something, I can't remember exact year. So the point is that medical education, you know, flourished in this country, and then, you know, our health system was you know, improving. And then also the living conditions in the country were improving, because, you know, we concentrated so much on agriculture and food production, you know, irrigation, rehabilitation, and so on and so forth. And then the transportation, then basic healthcare facilities, and most of all, education. And, you know, we introduced, you know, universal free education even before independence, you know, like, you know, the first education bill that led to the establishment of free education in this country, you know, was in 1945, which means that even a few years before independence. So the point is, all these things came together to produce this, you know, large youth population. And then the most important thing was this young population was very much exposed to modern ideas and you know, education, whatever the education had to offer. Like, for instance, you know, even in rural areas, we established primary schools, secondary schools, and even central schools. And these, you know, education institutions, you know, were accessible to almost everyone, even in remote rural areas. So the point is, the younger population was very much affected by, influenced by education, and the numbers were increasing. And of course, the economy, you know, had some structural constraints. And as a result, by 1971, unemployment among educated youth was very high. And in fact, about 24% of young people who were looking for employment were unemployed. So you can see how the 1971 uprising was, you know, produced by certain objective and subjective factors. I mean, objective factors I already outlined, but the subjective, of course, was the ideas. From where did the ideas come? And ideas came from, naturally, politics and society. So Sri Lanka was, at that time was divided between, let's say, a liberal, school of thought, and also was, more left-oriented, Marxist, socialist kind of thinking. So the younger people were naturally more attracted to, the leftist or socialist, ideas, because they were very much attracted to the progressive dimension of left politics, because left politics was basically was talking about social justice, equality, fairness, and progress, and all these things. So naturally, they were attracted.
Those are exactly what the people now are also asking for, isn't it, sir? The things that you just mentioned, it hasn't changed even in 2022. Social justice, equity, fairness, and anti-corruption, I think that has come maybe more now than what the people then were asking for, if you come to the differences between now and then.
Yeah, I think it is an important point. You see, young people were attracted to left politics in this country at the beginning, and as I already mentioned, these young people originated from certain social and economic backgrounds, and they were largely coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, because they realized that, well, reality was very much inconsistent with practice. I mean, the ideas. So they saw a clear gap between precept and practice. So they wanted to actually bridge the gap between precept and practice. In other words, you can't talk about equality and have gross inequalities. You can't talk about justice when you have so much injustice around, and so on. So the precept and practice, they were in conflict, if you like. And I think that is not only confined to politics, in Sri Lanka, and you can also see similar kind of disparities between precept and practice in other areas, like even in religion. You can see there is a huge gap between precept and practice. So the point is that these inconsistencies really did not really go down very well with young people, and they were naturally, trying to find some kind of bridge between what was, really popular at that time and what was really happening in the country. So the point in now, this situation continues, and of course, the present situation attracted not just the underprivileged youth, because the underprivileged youth were, very much affected by, what was going on. But whereas lately, even privileged, youth realized that, it was not good, because they wanted to live in a more, let's say, democratic, more just, more peaceful, and also, conditions that go with modern ideas of politics. For instance, we are living at a time when everything is open, and people have access to information both in terms of data and visuals. So you can see, how countries manage, issues in different situations. Like, for instance, how do you manage let's say, health? How do you manage education? How do you manage the economy? How do you manage state institutions, and so on and so forth? So you can see, and people, even if they don't travel around the world, they can get this information, in no time. You just have access to information,
Yes,
without
and
any.
I think, sir, the cyberspace, internet, and the access to the ease of access to data is what made people so aware of the corruption that can happen. I mean, and there's also a danger, there could be fake stuff also circulating, but people are more aware and more fearless, at least within the cyberspace, to voice their objections. And I think the advent of cyberspace is the difference that we see between the insurgencies earlier and now, where an ordinary citizen from home can oppose something that you think is not fair. We sometimes overestimate the power of cyberspace, I think, in practical action. But something that we saw in the 2015 election and something that we are seeing now is that ordinary citizens are empowered through this to understand what is going on and therefore get angry, which feeds into whatever is happening outside. So your point about accessibility to facts might be the reason where people are so angry about perceived corruption and the absolute disregard the government seems to have, whatever government, about those corruptions which are now being questioned much more than I think they were earlier. So I'm glad you pointed out to that fact. So the access to information and facts, which is feeding into the unrest that is happening now.
Yeah, but in addition, I would say that young people in general have to worry about their present situation and the future, much more than the older people like us. Because we have had our times, if you like. We may have experienced difficulties, but on the other hand, we have been able to get what we wanted. Like, for instance, we got our education, we got our jobs, and we basically built up our life in a significant way, despite of all the troubles that we have had in the country over the last 50 years. So the point is that young people today, when they look around, realize that their chances of life are very much affected by the circumstances that they witness in the country. And, I think this debt crisis brought the whole thing into the open, because it was somehow hidden, from the wider public. But whereas the people who knew the data, who had seen the data over the last, let's say, I would say 40 years, it was quite clear. I mean, for me, I looked at, I'm not an economist, but I'm very much interested in data. And therefore, I look at all kinds of data, environmental issues, economic issues, cultural issues, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, when you look at the data, it was quite clear that we were heading towards a disaster. I mean, the point is, you can't have a highly distorted economy in the modern world. You can't have a highly distorted economy unless you make use of the potential of the country to have a balanced economy. You can't have a stable present or a brighter future, obviously not. And that is exactly where we were for quite some time. But on the other hand, this economic crisis today brought everything out into the open, so there's nothing to hide. You can't say that, well, we are doing well now. I mean, until about 5-6 months ago, I mean, we heard, on television, some authorities coming out and saying, no, everything is okay, perfect, and so on and so forth. And then the whole thing collapsed in front of our own eyes. And then, of course, you cannot. What can you say? I mean, if the house has collapsed, then you can't say house is in order. House has collapsed.
So it's incredible that you saw, as a sociologist, you're a professor of sociology, the head of the sociology department at Colombo University. You said, I saw it 40 years ago. this coming. And now all of us are, as you say, seeing it in front of our eyes. And still, sir, some of it is being blamed on the pandemic, which is, absolutely, I like the convenience of the pandemic, which the leaders are sometimes using. So that's why this happened. And the very fact that you say it's unhealthy economic growth for the last 40 years that led us to this point. So how does the pandemic feed into all this, sir? Like, do they have a right to say blame it on the pandemic?
You see, the pandemic, pandemic was a problem at the beginning because, no country had a remedy, medical remedy. But within months and, within a year, many countries, came out with, vaccines. I mean, especially the leading countries, ranging from, let's say, the United States to China to, the United Kingdom to India to, and so on. So, these countries came up with a range of vaccines. And that really did the trick. We also have a medical research institute. I don't know what is going on there. That we'll have to ask them. You have to ask them. But the point is that medical research institute is one of the oldest institutions in this country, like the police, that we have in the country. The point is that these institutions were supposed to, really do well in their own fields, whether it is, let's say, management of crime, in the case of police, development of health, remedies to various health challenges that we face, and so on and so forth. But the point is that research is so critical in the modern world because you have to, come up with remedies based on knowledge, and knowledge can be translated into products. And that is what technology is all about. Technology came up because of ideas, new ideas, and the ideas had to be translated.
We watched in a lot of horror. We were always about 1 year late in taking action. When the pandemic hit, we had to listen to various people offering remedies which were not scientific. And maybe a crucial mistake was made at that point. We were about a year late.
I was really frightened at that time because I just couldn't believe what was going on, because I was also looking at what was happening in the rest of the world. I just couldn't believe. There can always be people who believe in, let's say, non-scientific things. In any society, even in the United States, you have such people. So no countries free of such tendencies among certain segments of society. But the fact of the matter is you have to have the mainstream being driven by new ideas and knowledge and so on and so forth. So the point is that we were very fortunate that these vaccines were developed, and we had to accept the vaccines as the response to this massive challenge. And we did. And as a result, we have basically brought the whole pandemic under control. And today, actually, people are moving around freely thanks to nothing else but, the vaccinations, mass vaccination. Now, vaccinations didn't come from within Sri Lanka. It came from outside. So from where did it come? How did they develop? And so on and so forth. So, we have to learn. That is the first thing that human beings have done over the centuries, I would say even millennia. And then, depending on how quickly you learn, you either progress or, if you don't learn, you regress. And if you learn, you progress, because it's experience. You see, and the farmers have been learning, for a long time, various things by doing. And of course, modern agricultural science came in, again, thanks to our universities and so on and so forth. And then they were able to really, increase the food production in this country everywhere. I remember in the 1970s when I was traveling around the country, I was so amazed how vibrant, some of these agricultural research stations were. Incredible. I mean, I used to go to Mahailu Palama. I just couldn't believe when I saw it, so beautifully organized and so on and so forth. And then, of course, various other research institutions that we established, like tea research, rubber research, rice research.
I'm going to lead to another thing that we watched in horror, the absolute sudden and banning of chemical fertilizer, which again fed into the crisis we are facing now. So that too, I mean, I'm going to link it to something that you have said in your introductory article here, that, in the 70s, 80s, a nationalism, naturally after colonization, you expect nationalism to raise its head, to repossess a sense of dignity. But in Sri Lanka, the way it happened, well, two things happened. One is we got divided in ethnic lines, and also a nativism had the power to be born, where we say our things are good and everything else, be doubtful about. And that kept on growing. It kept on growing, and with the war, it increased. So that at a point we came to a present where we say, don't trust even medicine from the West, even fertilizer from the West. I understand that chemical fertilizer is not 100% okay, and you can get, kidney diseases or whatever, but the way it was done, where we completely banned it. And I can't imagine what happened to the agriculture that happened in the rest of the country. That too, we can link it to a nativism, which we had developed so much that we were actually going after, smoke pots and penny and, the voice of God and all that. Even in 2021 and 2019, 2020, how did we let such, nativism is where you believe in the absolute glory of your own culture and nothing else. Was that something also that you noticed right from the right from the time you started studying Sri Lankan society? Because I realize even here, you say the nationalism that is coming up can easily be dangerous later.
No, there are two things here. One is the whole issue of civilization. And we know that, like in different parts of the world, there had been flourishing civilizations. Also in the Asian region, like for instance, we know Mohenjo-daro Harappa civilization, and then we were talking about hydraulic civilization. Let's say in the case of India, you see, like the boundaries are of course very dynamic because as you know, India and Pakistan separated and created two separate countries, though they were part and parcel of the British Empire. But now in the case of Sri Lanka, we also certainly had a medieval civilization, and we had also what was called a hydraulic civilization. And in fact, historians have written about the civilization, how it collapsed. I remember reading a collection of essays on the collapse of Rajarata civilization, edited by a historian, Sri Lankan historian. And how did that civilization collapse? And of course, there are various factors involved. You see, one thing that we have to remember in the social sciences is that you have no monocausal explanations for anything that happens. No one single cause of what happens around us. I think this is also true even for health. The most recent, let's say, jargon that the World Health Organization using is called SDH. What is SDH? Social determinants of health. Can you believe that? Medical science is based on biomedical sciences. Medicine is based on biomedical sciences. That is natural. So you had a very dominant biomedical model in the, in understanding health issues and also responding to health issues. But whereas later on, medical scientists themselves, in collaboration with the social scientists, came to the conclusion that even in the case of illness, there is no single, biomedical cause in many situations, and therefore you have to look at the larger picture, and therefore interventions also have to be more than medical, and you have to have various other interventions, and there are so many theories that have come up. There are so many models that have come up, like for instance, health in all policies. Health in all policies means, you have to have health not only in the health policy, health sector, but also health in other sectors. Like for instance, you cannot have transport without talking about health. You can't have, let's say,
Absolutely. So did you say
economy,
SDE,
without
social? What was the
no social determinants of health? Social determinants of health. SDH.
What is
SDH. Social determinants of health.
Health. I see. SDH. Social determinants of health. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that we have to understand the complexity of what we observe around us, and there is no single explanation for anything. And I think in the case of health, we certainly have to look at let's say the role of various chemicals like that we use in our day-to-day activities, whether it's agriculture or household issues or whatever. But at the same time, you also have to look at what other factors are involved.
Getting back into the chemical things, sir, if you can try to list some things. I mean, I'm completely in respect to what you said. It's never this because of that. It's never monocausal. But to the crisis we are facing now, did some recent decisions aggravate some of these things which are happening? For example, I mean, you said from 40 years, you could see that we are not heading for a very healthy economy. But this is another thing that the young people are saying now. There were some decisions made which could have averted the depth of this crisis. And one thing that they are pointing to is a critical error in management of, wealth. There was corruption at very deep levels, maybe in ways which we hadn't seen before. That led to it. That makes a very specific call. From the beginning, it was one specific call, again, which they have not been listened to, for the removal of the president, right? And could recent factors of, for example, corruption have started this, as opposed to other social factors that started the earlier revolts? This isn't quite a revolt, but the unease now, yes.
Yeah, there are two things that come to my mind now. One is called evidence-based policymaking. Evidence-based policymaking. It is really accepted globally in any country, in any part of the world. You see, evidence-based policymaking. If you are managing your 3 acres in the village, you can decide how you are going to do it. I mean, if you are managing your village property, then you can decide whom to recruit for your farm work, or you can decide whom to invite, whom to bring in to attend to your household work. You can decide all these things because you are managing your private estate. But if you are managing a country, it is an entirely different system because it doesn't belong to you. The country doesn't belong to you. It belongs to everyone. Now, when I say everyone, there are so many people in a country. We have 22 million people, and you have all kinds of people in this country. we have on the one hand people who have devoted their major part of their adult life for education, and some people don't stop, they till they die, because learning is something that you continue till your death. I mean, I'm still reading, I'm still writing, I'm still listening to people and so on. So which means it's a continuous process. So learning is key, right? That's why good education is very critical. It doesn't give you all the knowledge that you require to address all the issues in the world. No, obviously not. And that is why we have specialization. That is why we establish universities. Why did we establish universities? You tell me. You have to ask them also, why did they establish, why did they want to have university? Because, that is where you go into detail, that is where you go into great, various issues at different levels. So you have, chemical scientists, you have biologists, you have, let's say agronomists, you have all these people, you have hydrologists, you have all these people who matter, for various things, in particular, agriculture. So in other words, I'm a sociologist. I do not know really a lot of these things that these people have studied in the universities. But then the reason why we have universities is to really allow people who come to the university to pursue different lines of research. And then, they don't do it for fun. I mean, of course, I want to come to another point here. We are driven by not only knowledge, we are also driven by ideas, and also we are driven by values. Now, I think the biggest problem that we are facing today is the huge, dichotomy between what I call instrumental values and substantive values. Instrumental values and substantive values. What is an instrumental value? Instrumental value is that you see something for you in everything. You can get something, from everything. So that is, you're basically trying to get something for you. Instrumental value. So now look at education. You can say, well, I'm going to do this, that, and the other because I can do well in my private life. I can build the biggest house. I can have the most expensive car. I can send my children to international schools. I can send them abroad. I can, go on leisure trips. I can do all these things. And so that's the instrumental. Like you see something for you in everything. But then the problem is that, you don't look at, what is there for others. What is there for others? And that is where the substantive values come in. Substantive values tell you, look, it is not only you are here. There are many others and different situations. And therefore, whatever we do should not only benefit us, whatever we should also benefit the others. Now, whatever we do in the universities not only benefit us, it benefits the entire society. And that's why we are wasting our time even on a Sunday.
Can I just say, sir, that is what should happen. Whether that is actually happening now is another question. Again, we will not go in there.
Yes. No, I want to respond to your question. Yes. So the point is, when you get into something, you should ask whether you have the background to it, whether you have the necessary wherewithal to do what you are supposed to do. I think this question people don't ask. I'm not talking only about politicians in this country. I'm also asking these questions about everybody else. I think it's a huge crisis in this country with respect to values. Our value system actually has been more and more tilted towards the instrumental side than to the substantive side over the last, I would say 4 or 5 decades.
I agree.
And actually, this is connected to so many other things, like, for instance, neoliberal policies that we have adopted in this country over the last, let's say, 4 decades or more. So, you see, pushed us towards instrumental values. You see, education meant something entirely different to what it has become in Sri Lanka today. I mean, why did they say that we should create equal opportunities through education? Because education at that time was supposed to benefit, everyone in various ways. So some people become literate. That itself is something. It's better to be literate than illiterate. So education was going to do that. So increasing literacy was an objective, which was good, because that contributed to our personal life as well as our life in public. For instance, if you can read a newspaper, that's better than not being able to read a newspaper. Being able to read a book is better than not being able to read. So literacy was good. But then you want more than literacy, and that's why we established a hierarchy of schools. Not the kind of let's say jungle that we have in the education system today. We have virtually a jungle. It's like the concrete jungle in Colombo. Now we have not a city, ordered city today in the country. In Colombo, because it was supposed to be a garden city in 1920. And you can go to the records at CMC, you will realize that Sri Lanka, the Colombo was perceived at that time as a garden city, and that it should remain as a garden city. Now we converted that into a concrete jungle in no time. Now you can see how difficult it is for people to live in this concrete jungle without power, without transport. So the point is, you see, now 1920s, if we had now, I remember when I first came to Colombo as a student, I just couldn't believe. I mean, that was such a leisurely place. You could get into a bus and go to any part of the city, and get into any train and go to Kandy or Colombo, or Kandy or Golo, Mataro, whatever. So, I mean, that was what we had. Before 1977, when we liberalized the economy and allowed all kinds of vehicles to come into the picture. Now today, we have 1.3 million three-wheels. Can you believe that? Now we have a population, we have a labor force of 8.5 million. Out of that 8.5 million labor force, we have 1.8 million or nearly 2 million working in the Middle East and other countries. Now look and put that together, and then you have another 1.3 million working in the public sector. You put that also together. Now, then half of that 8.5 million. I mean, they are in these three areas. Foreign employment, three-wheel driving, and then public sector. Now, who is producing for us to eat and to consume, all kinds of industrial gadgets? One thing, of course, the industrial sector was the most badly affected by all these changes, because we lost all the industries in this country.
Absolutely. So I remember when I was growing up, we had factories producing things. And, I was out of school in the late 80s, where we saw the liberalization or the open economy coming in 1977. And now I was thinking, the only job that seems available to any young person is a three-wheeler, because there is no industry, there's no other job being offered to them, except maybe the municipal councils, right? And it's really sad. No one is actually talking about where employment can lie to produce, either agrarian, and also it's connected to our social value system again, where we don't quite honor manual labor. And the white collar jobs, again, you have mentioned this in your introduction, the respect given and the disrespect given to manual labor also may have led to something which you are saying now. Who's producing food, and it's an import export economy. We only have like clothes mainly to export, and we get everything in, things that were produced in Sri Lanka before. Now everything comes in. So that's a very valid question. And I think three-wheelers, I don't think anyone has any other place to go in. A young person.
But the worst is not what I already said. Worst is the rapid expansion of the informal sector. people, basically doing bits and pieces for a living and moving around on a daily basis to make a living. And I think that is really very, very important, because that is the largest sector of employment, informal sector. But the point is that
සිංහලෙන් කුලි දෛනික කුලි වැඩ කරන්නන් දෙස සිංහලෙන් කිව්වොත්
දෛනික ආදායම් මාර්ගවල එදින ඉන්න දෛනික తాවකාලික අවිධිමත් රැකියාවල නිරත වෙලා ඉන්න අය. ඒක තමයි වැඩිපුරම.
We'll go back to English, so I will repeat this in Sinhala. I just wanted to clarify that in English. So we'll do the Sinhala one later. You can go back to English. Right.
Yeah, see, the point is that, with this kind of change in the structure of the economy from the 1970s onwards, we basically created a highly distorted economy. And when you look at the three sectors, agriculture, then you have industry, and then the service sector. Now we see the service sector cannot really grow at the expense of the agriculture and industry, because you need commodities to consume. Not only services you need commodities to consume. Can we manage without commodities? Can you manage without food? You have to have all kinds of food, and that food production therefore has to be very, very important in any economy. And then industrial, I mean, all the things that we are using in our day-to-day lives come from industries. But that is exactly what collapsed in this country, under neoliberal policies. For instance, all the primary industries that we had across the country were very badly affected, and many of these industries collapsed. Now, the point is that we became so dependent on imports, and that is exactly what we have seen over the last 40 years. And the data is, very clear. You look at the trade gap. That is, what you sell to the outside world to earn foreign exchange, and what you import using that foreign exchange that you earn. Now, the point is that the gap between the two, that is, always we had to spend twice as much to buy what we import from other countries, because we had a huge deficit in terms of what we needed in the country for day-to-day life. For instance, you look at the transport sector, is totally dependent on imports. Can you do without transport? Then, health, can you do without, all this equipment that in the health sector people are using? No, you can't. Health sector will collapse. And then take the education sector, take the media, you take any sector. All the services that we are talking about, telecommunication, electricity, water supply, and all these things. Now, these services also depend, very much on imports, industrial products. Now, you see, if you don't have industries to produce not everything that we need, but at least a significant part of what we use on a day-to-day basis. Now, say, for instance, mobile telephone. Is there anyone without a mobile telephone? Now, how many mobile telephones that we produce in this country? Did our leaders ever, thought? Did they think that it is absolutely necessary for us to produce some of the things that we use in this country? Now, 1.3 million three-wheels. Are we producing any three-wheels here? I don't know. You have to ask them. We don't, to my knowledge, we don't even produce bicycles.
I remember in learning in economics, so this is economics in school, that it was cheaper to get from outside than produce inland, right? But that theory, I think, is quite a deadly theory given the unemployment, given the lack of money for people. I think that's how neoliberalism works. It tells it's cheaper to get it from outside. So therefore, everybody just goes with the flow. Could that have been the reason where we just stopped producing anything in Sri Lanka?
No, I think Yeah, absolutely. I think, the point is this, it is not a question of producing everything that we want in the country. Absolutely not. That is unrealistic, and that is really, idealistic thinking. But it doesn't mean that we cannot produce quite a lot in this country, maybe using even our own local raw materials.
At
I
least
mean, for
parts of
instance,
the product, no, sir. At least
yeah,
parts of
I
it,
mean,
not
so
giving them the whole thing.
yeah, I mean, it is a chain of, I mean, you start with the raw materials, and then you go for, let's say various products, and it may be not a finished product sometimes, sometimes it may be, something that you want to export without, being a finished product. Like for instance, you can, let's say textiles, if you take textiles, you can, produce textiles, but you don't have to go into stitching clothes. I mean, if you don't have labor, it's better for you to send your, textiles to another country so that they can use their excess labor and produce it. So I think, it is actually international division of labor as much as division of labor within a country.
Right.
No
And
modern,
the free trade zone was actually established for this purpose, wasn't it, sir? Even though
yeah,
the profit completely doesn't belong to Sri Lanka, it's just salary that the people get.
yeah. I mean,
How does that fit into this framework?
well, the point is you can have industrial, zones in different parts of the country, specializing in certain areas. Now, if you go to countries where they didn't have, let's say, their own technology and, whatever, their own technological products and so on, they actually invited investors to come in and establish, what are called assembly plants. Now, say, for instance, Vietnam. Vietnam actually has so many factories across the country producing things for Japan, Korea, China, and so on and so forth. They basically produce things for other countries. In other words, Japanese cars are being produced in Vietnam. You see in assembly plants. So maybe components are all imported, technology is imported, and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, they produce it in the country, and they employ their own people and so on. So that, and it is the same principle. I mean, we haven't the technology of our own to produce a mobile phone. We don't produce any of the components that go into the mobile phone, but the mobile phones can be put together, at an assembly plant. So I'm not again, I don't want to go into details in these areas, but the fact of the matter is that there are certain industries that you can build from the scratch. Like for instance, using agricultural raw materials, you can produce industrial products. You can turn any agricultural product into an industrial product. See, it's basically processing, and then you see, for instance, if you take the fruits can be turned into juices. It can be turned into dehydrated products. It can be turned into various other kinds of things.
In
So
Thailand,
the
I
point,
remember, sir, in Thailand, the amount of stuff they did with fruit was incredible. And there was
no,
such a market for
yeah.
it.
You see, then you have to concentrate on then you have to concentrate on the production of the raw material also. I mean, it's not a matter of just using up what you have. It's a matter of also expanding the cultivation of certain crops for it that would give you the raw material. Now, for instance, look at the price of cashew nuts. I just can't believe in a country that we could use about 1/3 of the land mass to produce cashews. I mean, you have to have, let's say, I mean, you just
So you're stuck. So we have to probably, I'll just pause it for a minute, sir, and we will get back to that. You got stuck for a minute, sir. So we will start from where you were talking about kaju, and that 1/3 of our land is actually okay.
Okay, so the point is now this is really not my area of expertise or interest, but the fact of the matter is that there are people who can really come up with plans to produce more cashews in the country. There are people who can do it, because we have the specialists who can tell, okay, let's produce cashews, because it is very much in demand, not only in this country but in the rest of the world. So you have a commodity that you can produce here, and then you can actually process it, and then you can export it, and also, of course, our people will also have cashew nuts at an affordable price. Now, same is true for various other things. Like, for instance, a lot of the household things that we need, we can use natural raw materials, which we can easily grow in Sri Lanka. So
even a broom and a idala now, sir. We have other countries sending in products.
Yeah. So the point is, when these are small things that I'm talking about, but then the primary industries are also critical. I mean, for instance, I'm again not an industrial, person. I don't really want to talk about it. But the only thing I have to say is that the collapse of the industrial sector in the country, reducing it to very few things like garments, I think distorted our economy in a big way. And then, of course, we were very happy to send these people abroad, and we established this national institution called the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment. Why? Because we wanted to export labor. We wanted to export labor so that we can earn foreign exchange. Now the point is, now that has become a big issue now, no? Because these people are not sending money through the banks or whatever, I don't know. So the point is now, Sri Lanka is a small country with a small population and with a small labor force. We can't do things that Bangladesh is doing with 140 million people. Where we are a country with a small population, 8.5 million labor force. Now, what can we do? We know we have to make best use of this labor, which we have, like, to have a balanced economy in the country. Not to build sand, build castles on sand. That is exactly what we are doing today. We are building, a city on sand. I don't know. Again, I don't want to go into details because I don't really have the in-depth knowledge of what is going on with the fourth city and so on. So the point is, it's a question of priorities. It's a question of taking evidence-based decisions, and evidence-based decision has to be based on advice given by specialists in these fields. And we establish all the institutions that you need to facilitate that process. They are there. For education, we have an education commission. We have, agriculture. We have an agricultural policy, institute. We have one. We have more than that, actually. We have Agrarian Research and Training Institute. Then all these research assistants and so on and so forth. Then we have all the institutions that you can think of. But the point is not, are we making best use of these institutions for the purpose that they were established for? And my point is that they are not being fully used for the purpose for which they were established. So, I mean, I mentioned the Medical Research Institute, and then, of course, the universities. Why did we establish universities if you don't want to listen to a specialist? Why did we establish? Is it to just create employment for section of the population? No, it was to really make use of the knowledge that they will produce for the benefit of a wider society, not just for them to have.
Another problem that we are seeing is the politicization of the very institutes that were meant not to be politicized. Like,
absolutely.
Even in the university system, we have absolutely political people whose discourse is not about creating knowledge, but defending whatever regime they are backing. So I think we see a clear danger, as much as I agree with the establishments of institutions that were meant to further the fields of discipline they were in, we also saw a very strong politicization of these very same institute, at least at the higher levels, which then became more defensive about whatever policy the government decides than seeking good answers to whatever problems we have. And this could also be leading to one of the problems we have at present, where people are saying enough.
Yeah, we have come to a very important point here, and it's a fundamental issue that we are talking about here, and that is the role of institutions in a modern society. No modern society can even survive, let alone flourish, without efficient institutions. Without efficient institutions managed by people who are well established in those fields. The countries have flourished, countries have collapsed because of this. You see, having a modern state is critical for a modern society. But that modern state has to be, supported by a whole range of institutions that would address a whole range of issues that we face on a regular basis, whether it is health, education, industry, law enforcement, you name it. Now, the institutions that we established were established for a purpose, and if you only have to do one thing to realize that, that is, you get hold of the let's say the particular piece of legislation under which the institution was established. Take, for instance, the local councils. The Pradeshya Sabha Act tells you what Pradeshya Sabha is supposed to do and how Pradeshya Sabha should manage its affairs in the particular jurisdiction that it is functioning. Now, that is a legislation, because Pradeshya Sabha Act should guide everyone in the local government sector, so that they would make sure that the local councils function effectively and efficiently. Now, of course, over a period of time, it can change and deteriorate and so on. And then in 1998, Presidential Commission was established to go into the problems in the local government sector and make recommendations to improve local governance in Sri Lanka. Now, I was a member of the local government reform commission, and I know how hard we worked for more than a year to really prepare a very good report, 300 pages or so, translated into all 3 languages, and with all the recommendations that you need to revamp the local government sector in the country. Have you done it? Have we done it? No, we haven't done it because, but then in India, our neighbor,
why didn't we do it, sir? Why didn't we do it? No one listened or read the report, and no one listened to
no. The point is, the certain things were done, but the point is that it is a process that you have to set in motion. Now you can see the present state of affairs in the local government sector. I mean, the point is the local government is the base, in any political system, because you cannot really have, you can have what you call deepening of democracy only at a local level, because at a local level, people can participate in the management of local affairs because it is in their own locality.
Crucial. See, but the point that's another way of getting youth involved in their own
absolutely
lives.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And then not only youth and citizens, also specialists in the area. I know quite a few people in my network in different countries. Actually, they are senior academics, but then in their own areas, they advise the local council. I mean, free of charge, as volunteers, but then the council benefits, and then in turn, the people living in that area also benefit because they get the best, advice from the specialists in various fields, whether it's environmental or whatever. So that is so the point is that if you don't allow these institutions to function under the guidance of the specialist in those areas, those institutions become counterproductive, right? And then in this country, we have politicized many institutions, or I would say most institutions, over a long period of time, that they have not been able to perform their functions in that are very, very critical for the welfare of the people, the development of the country, and so on and so forth. So the fact of the matter is that when you really play around with the institutions, the state institutions that we have built, based on legislation to benefit the people and the country, then that is really a very, very critical stage. And that is where we have been for quite some time now in this country. So the institutions are there. Now people ask, why do we have to have this institution? Like, for instance, we have a National Transport Commission. Can you believe that? National Transport Commission. And the point is, National Transport Commission is supposed to develop transport policies, right? Now you have to be guided by the policy advice coming from the National Transport Commission. Similarly, local government, you have to get the advice from the relevant institutions that have been established under these legislation, like, for instance, Pradesh Sabha Act and so on, municipalities ordinance and so on and so forth. So you have the Education Commission, National Education Commission. Now, if I started by saying that, if you are managing a few acres in your own village, then you can decide whom to get for which work and so on and so forth. You can decide, because that's your private property. You are managing it on your own. Whether you produce something or not, that's your problem. Whether you starve or not is not the problem of anybody else. So, but the point is that here, when you mismanage institutions, when you politicize institutions, when you do not make best use of these institutions for the betterment of society, you are creating a huge problem for the entire population in the country. Now that is what has happened to Sri Lanka. So you have to understand how important it is these institutions are, for a country to flourish and so on and so forth. Now this I always say that this crisis that we are facing today did not fall from the heavens. It was produced from within the country, and then you can easily figure out which institutions are responsible and how those institutions were managed. Who were in those institutions, what were the decisions they taken, what kind of advice was given, and all these are questions that arise out of this massive crisis that we are facing today. So the point is, it is our own responsibility to manage the economy. It is our own responsibility to manage our social sector.
And I think, sir, now if you notice, every time a regime changes, you have directors also changing of these very institutions that you talk about. And I think that is one of the biggest problems, because it's not about the state anymore. It's about serving regime.
I have not been an ivory tower academic. You see, I have been participating in public life in the broadest sense. In every sense of the term. I never distance myself from the wider public.
Yes.
I've been writing, and in fact, this book that I have published, Towards a Sane Society, is a collection of essays that I published in Daily Mirror.
Yes.
Over a period of 3 years. Now,
yes.
You see, that is basically trying to relate to the wider public. And then what is happening in the country, you have to also get involved as a specialist, as an academic. So I have done that also. I have been in so many institutions, in some ways I mean, I never held office in various institutions very much, but on the other hand, I mean, these committees and commissions and so on and so forth, and we have worked very hard to, provide the necessary recommendations to be followed up by the governments that have been in power. I can give you so many examples, but I'm not going to give these things because it takes time. But the fact of the matter is that you have no choice but adhere to, principles and various ideas that are current in the rest of the world, because Sri Lanka is just another country. I mean, it is so important for you and me because that's the country where we were born and living and so on. But the fact of the matter is that the whole world is there for us to learn from. So there are countries that have done well, there are countries that have not done so well, there are countries that have basically collapsed. Now, from where do you learn? You can learn from all three. How did a country do well? There's something that you can easily learn. Like, for instance, take a country like Korea. Korea, basically moved up from a very difficult situation in the 60s to one of the most, modern industrial countries in the world today. I mean, most of us have, produced products coming from Korea, in our households. Like, for instance, the mobile telephone produced by Samsung. I mean, that is everywhere, I mean, in this country. But, we should be, I think, we should also have some shame. It's not only that we should be proud of our great civilization and, a great country and so on and so forth, but we should also be ashamed in some situations, because if a country like Korea can, move up from the scratches, from very difficult kind of circumstances to what it is today, and then just look at the country that we are all talking about, China.
Exactly. Yeah.
That country. I mean, that was, we learned about China, as a peasant society. Nothing else. It's a peasant society where you have small producers scattered all around the country producing food. Of course, there were handicrafts and things like that. But the point is that it became the industrial powerhouse of the world, in 3 decades. I mean, it's not like in the 80s. They basically open their economy for investment from outside, so that in technology and finance and all that can flow in. And then, it within 3 decades, it became number one, in terms of industrial output. Now, these are 2 countries in our own region. You don't have to go to Europe and talk about, Germany and
and even Japan, sir.
I don't. So it's not a question of,
went to dust. Japan went to dust after the World War, and look at them now. So it is possible.
So I mean, I have spent time in so many parts of the world, lived in quite a number of countries for certain periods, thanks to my university sabbatical. I always took my sabbatical in advance because I was always ready to go to another country and do my teaching and research and so on. So I always use more time than any other university academic to go to overseas.
Before we leave that section about politicization, I think one of the saddest things which are happening now, which concerns you and me, is that even the university administrative systems, like say the vice chancellor or whatever, that itself has become politicized. And then, every time you say universities are the place where we should research on what should be done, once this is also politicized, there is not much, I don't see much hope where we can be completely independent and, express our views. So I think we've lost the plot in what it means to serve the country, because serving the country doesn't necessarily mean serving a particular regime. And I think that is a vital thing we need to remember, even as academics or whatever the commissions that you speak about, the institutions as well. And could that have also I'm sorry, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I can respond to that. Yeah, having observed what was going on in the public sector over a long period of time, I realized that we are going to have highly politicized institutions in the country, and that we were going to have serious trouble in this country in no time. And that's exactly what happened. Like, for instance, if you really politicize, specialized institutions, and you really appoint people who are not the best in that particular field to lead those institutions are going to deteriorate and eventually become dysfunctional. That is,
Exactly,
not only
obsolete. It can be obsolete. There are some
yeah.
names that you mentioned.
Now, having observed all these things happening in the country, I pleaded in public. I can't remember exactly when and where. I pleaded uh, that that the political leaders should leave at least one institution unpoliticized, and that was the university. I said, you can politicize everything, but leave the universities alone. That was my plea. I don't know exactly when. I think it might have been about 20 years ago, maybe even maybe about 30 years ago. I can't remember the exact thing. But the point is that this politicization has been going on for a long time, and especially for about 4 decades. So I wouldn't say that it didn't happen last. I don't think that it happened yesterday. It happened over a period of time under different kind of regimes, but it became worse and worse over time, and that is when our universities also came under the direct purview of political elites. Now that was really the most tragic thing, because universities, are looked upon by various people as the place where knowledge is produced, where independence of the academia is preserved, where the academics and the students can pursue their various academic and other activities independently of various influences in society. But unfortunately, that did happen. And of course, that did not happen just as an external influence alone, because you cannot clap with one hand, no? Can you? You can't clap with
And
one
no,
hand.
sir. And
So,
the independence of thought, I think that's crucial.
yeah.
Independence of thought, which should
So,
happen in a university.
yeah,
And the willingness of some of us to actually not mind being political stooges. I think we have a huge problem in I don't think the respect that has been there for universities is even there anymore, because we have proved ourselves how much a part of the political and the animal that is politics in Sri Lanka we can become. So I doubt whether university dons are treated with the same kind of respect they had been before. All, as you say, because of our fault as well.
yeah, I think it is our collective image that
Yeah.
matters. You see, it is not, it is not as individual, but, the collective image, how do the people outside look at the universities today? And of course, we know, as I already mentioned, you can't clap with one hand. Political leaders cannot do what they have what they have done without people from within the institutions participating in that process of politicization. So the point is that if academics, you know, if academics, do not maintain their own independence, then it is very difficult to resist any kind of pressure from outside to, let's say, do various things using the universities. I think they have done so much using the universities over the years, but the fact of the matter is that unless all academics want to remain independent and not to be part of this, so that I think you cannot really achieve much. Now, you see, the point is that we don't have to. If you are a university academic today, you are a privileged person. I mean, you have all the privileges, and once you have all those privileges, you should be happy with what you have, rather than see whether you can get something more. I mean, I think that is the problem. So this is the point. So the point is that ultimately it boils down to what I said, the
Substantial
instrumental
value.
values.
Exactly.
So the point is that it is instrumental values are not just confined to narrowly focused politicians alone, narrowly focused let's say
No,
political
even professorships, sir. The reason whether you want to become a professor for instrumental reasons or substantial reasons, it can even boil down to that.
Absolutely. I enjoy being guided by substantive values, because that gives me more satisfaction than anything else. Because, I always think that, well, I haven't stopped. You see, now, I mean, that I retired in 2016, but I have probably published more than some of the academics in the university. You can go to the relevant websites and see. I mean, the point is that, I mean, you have to really enjoy what you're doing. But the point is that it is important to achieve what you want to achieve. There's no question about it.
I know. And then I've been blessed, sir, because I see in my father also, who still works harder than me. He retired much earlier than you. And
absolutely.
then
No,
people
I mean,
like Keno Dharmadas. I mean,
no.
there is a generation of professors who we can really look up to and see them work. I mean, I see it in front of my eyes. So
no, I have held positions in the university. No, you know that. But I think the most important position I held was the senior student council position. That was at the most difficult period. When in 1989, when the country was in turmoil, as you already mentioned, after the second JVP uprising and all that. But then, I was asked to, take up this very, very important position in Colombo, and I took it up. And because I was pursued by everybody as an independent person, in the sense that I was never a part of any political party or anything like that. I have my own political ideas, and I advocate certain policies and so on and so forth. But that is, not as a political activist, but as an academic. So I could do my job very well when I was the senior student councillor. There were many people, there are many people around who were at the university as students at that time, even in parliament. They know how I managed it, you see. I mean, first thing I did was to go and invite Professor Sarachandra, who was already retired, to come back to the university. And I took him to the university, and I kept him there for 2 years, because I felt that his presence in the university was so important for students and everybody else. So the point is, culture was so important. So values are so important, you see. So the point is that when you embrace instrumental values in everything, then not only that you are downgrading yourself, not only that you are going down as an individual, but you also bring the entire society down. I think that is where we have come to now, because we did not really see a larger purpose for what we are doing. Education has a much larger purpose than helping people to find employment, allowing university academics to get what they want. Education is much more. And you can see that public education is so important. And the same is true for other areas like media, for instance. Media has a larger purpose, not just to get money from advertisements and do whatever they like to please the wider public. It is to really
if we get to the question of media, we'll have another 2-hour discussion of the actual harm it has done in backing particular regimes for personal profit, no matter what the values they stand
Yeah. So
for.
I think, yeah.
I will
And
probably end with the question I started, sir, the difference between what happened before and what is happening now. And I want to refer back to something that you had said, that, you know, in the 70s and 80s, one thing that happened was young people, youth got divided by ethnicity, and that nationalism was on the rise. And Professor Yangoda's article here says in a way, the fall of socialist thought that happened in the late 70s and in the 80s gave rise to a lacuna which was filled with nationalistic thinking. And he also mentions the fact that it may not have been coincidental, because we saw that that was a time where neoliberalism came in, and nationalistic thought helped feed some of the divisions that helped in the spread of neoliberalism. And I wanted to ask you, isn't something that we are seeing in the current youth protest something we had never seen before, that there is a Sinhala Tamil Muslim unity, which we are seeing now, which goes against everything that the nationalists thought that had preceded, this decade. And for me, that's a sign of hope. How do you see that, sir? This difference, that everybody standing together against corruption this time.
so I think young people, became more and more ethnically conscious, much before, the 1970s. In fact, what really happened was that through our education system, we created the conditions that are, very conducive, that were very conducive for the rise of ethnic and religious identities. When you have a segregated education system based on ethnicity, religion, and language, that is a recipe for disaster for any country. In other words, you have to bring young people together through education.
Yes.
You don't really, divide the population, young population, in terms of ethnic, religious, and other identities.
Unless it helped political regimes, sir. And I think that sadly, that's what we saw.
Yeah. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that this education system that we, did not use to really bring the country together, to bring the young population together, really started much earlier, when we introduced, let's say, monolingual education. Kanangara reforms did not expect monolingual education. Kanangara reform, wanted, Kanangara reform basically facilitated, let's say, mobility of young, mobility of people based on education, and they did not want young people to become monolingual. In other words, second language, a linked language was so critical. So when you look at what happened through re-education introduced by 2000 by Kanangara, it did not create that kind of division, because many people moved into English language education later on in their educational career, especially universities and so on. So the point is that when you have an education system that is based entirely on ethnicity, language, and religion, then you create divisions, because that is natural. Natural because it is socialization of children that matters. We become what we have become because of our socialization, both at home and then later in education. Now, we did not really address this issue, effectively, in our education system, and as a result, we have had, all these divisions being created through the educational kind of process. So the point is that if you only speak Tamil, and if you have no opportunity to learn another language, you are basically confined to UOC, and the same is true for Sinhala, and the same might be true even for English, like for instance.
So you say a very powerful thing here, that this education system made sure that the intelligent young Tamil person couldn't speak, had no way of communication unless he knew English with the intelligent, educated young Sinhala person. And
Yeah,
that
actually,
these ties were made impossible practically by the way education was constructed.
absolutely. And then this situation became worse, after, let's say, neoliberal policies were introduced, when an additional dimension came into the picture, and that was class. For instance, when you don't have a kind of an integrated system of education, which we did not have, we had a segregated system, and it became far more unequal after 1977, when we created all kinds of schools. And I counted, instead of 3 types of schools, like that's primary, secondary, and post secondary, we actually have 12 types of schools in Sri Lanka. I mean, you can have any kind of school. You can have national schools. You can have, let's say, zonal. I don't know what. You can have international schools. You can have private schools. You can have English medium schools. You can have Sinhala medium schools. You can have all 3 media in some schools, and so on and so forth. You basically create such a mess, with education after like post 1977, and actually people don't realize how badly our education system became unequal after 1977. And this division that you have also talked about, that Colombo came actually after that, because that was true. I mean, like if you send your children to an international school, I mean, naturally, children learn in English, right? In a country where the 2 main languages spoken by the vast majority of the people are Sinhalese and Tamil. And then you have, in this globalized world, where many people do not have facilities to learn a second language. I mean, the point is, minimum.
Absolutely. I am actually in the field, and the essay you spoke about was by Dr. Prabha Manuratna, where she showed how badly the resources are distributed, where the schools in the rural areas just keep going further and further down simply because they have no resources, and how wealth is accumulated with some of the Colombo schools. And I'm in the field of English language teaching, sir, and I know how badly people who are teaching English need help. So what else? I mean, there's no point talking about the students, because the teachers who are in charge of English itself needs help in English language teaching. So where is that method of communication then? It's absolutely non-existent. Yeah.
No, when I was in the primary school, I had a teacher who was teaching, in addition to other subjects, he was also teaching English. That was my first exposure to English, in one of the most remote villages in the Gold District. I mean, so the point is, even in the remotest part of Sri Lanka, schools were supposed to, teach a second language. And I mean, that is what we were exposed to. Later on, I went to a good school in Gold, but that's a different issue. But most of my younger school years were spent in, these, village schools and so on. But that did not prevent me from, getting a decent knowledge of English. That was required for me to, read a few things, that were published, that were available in public library, and so on and so forth. So the point is that, I'll just want to, mention one thing related to educational inequality that has a bearing on youth prospects for young people now. You see, you take English, you take science education. Now, science, and technology, are taken for granted now. No one is saying that, without science and technology, you cannot do much. So now you have to have access to, science education in all secondary schools. But the fact of the matter is that only 26% of the secondary schools have facilities for teaching science stream for A-level. In other words, 2/3 of the young people, in rural areas do not have the option of going into the science stream, mainly because they do not have access to, such education in their own school. Of course, you can say, well, why don't you go to another school? But the point is that then you will have certain people taking their children away and putting them into better schools, urban schools. But the fact of the matter is that the disadvantaged parents cannot do it. And they end up, being confined to, let's say, non-science streams. Then you say that, well, this is not good because people should go into, other areas. Why concentrate in arts and commerce? But, you create the conditions and then you say, well, this is not good. I mean, so that this is, these people probably think that we cannot see through what is happening in this country.
Responsibilization. I mean, Dr. Manuratna has also said that, sir, that the blame is put back onto you when the blame should be on the system. Again, in that article, she had said that responsibilization. You're made to feel bad about things that you have no control over. Yes. So
absolutely. I think, we can only do one thing. As academics and researchers, we can work on knowledge, we can generate data, we can analyze the data and present them in various ways and so on and so forth. And then based on what we have done, we can say, let's do this, let's do that. But we are not the people who do it, and there are people who take decisions, on what is happening in the country. Now, the question is, there is a total disconnect between knowledge and policy making in this country. There's a total disconnect. And that is really.
I don't want to name this name, but I'll name it anyway. With groups like Vyatmaga and all that, the reputation of people who are professional further deteriorated because they saw that finally, no matter, it's not being professional. It's about the values that you hold, of whether you want to further your field and help people through that, or whether you simply want political power. So I think I don't want you to answer that because I don't want you to get into Vyatmaga and all that jazz that happen. But I think being professional and good in your discipline is not enough. We also need the moral value system that should want you to serve the country and not particular political regimes. I'll just leave it at that. Do you want to respond to that, sir? Is it all right if you do?
Absolutely. I think the point is that we should know who we are. We all have our own identities. With our identities come, all the values and all the ideas that we represent. And I think that is where our strength is, nowhere else. And we should not be really getting involved in, the political process in the way that many people have done in this country. We are as political as anybody else, but the way we relate to politics is quite different. And we want to relate to politics as independent academics and researchers, and we don't want to force people to accept what we are saying and so on and so forth.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is that the people in this country should realize the value of knowledge and research and advice coming from specialists in all the fields that you can think of. And the people also have a responsibility. It is not, so it is a kind of a collective effort that is required. I think the younger people have been at the receiving end when it comes to a lot of these policies that we have talked about. But at the same time, they have, come out and they are saying that, look, we want to have a future. We want to have a decent society. We want to get on with our lives.
So how do you, let me repeat the question. How do you explain the fact that the Sinhala Tamil Muslim, everybody is standing together in this particular, despite the fact that they also grew up within the segregated education system? What has changed? Is it access to information? Is it why are they standing together now when they never did before?
It is one thing. Yeah, absolutely. One thing that this crisis did, was what one thing that this crisis did is very important, and that is they basically, I mean, the crisis impacted on everyone. Crisis brought everyone out into the streets, literally, because they had to join these queues, whether it's at petrol stations or gas stations or whatever. So you see, there you have no discrimination. For the first time, our state did not discriminate. everybody was treated equally, because you see, everybody wanted gas, irrespective
Equally
of whether they are Tamil,
destitute,
Muslim,
sir.
or whatever. So all the religions have to come together, because Buddhist temples were deprived of electricity, Catholic Church was deprived of electricity, and Sinhalese boutique keepers, didn't have, electricity to, really do their business. And, all the businessmen across the country, irrespective of their ethnicity and religion, face the problem of, fuel. So it is ultimately the crisis that brought everybody together, because they realize that they look around and they see different people around you, waiting in the queue for electricity and so on and so forth. So they thought that, well, we are in the same boat now, and therefore let's see whether we could really work together. So I think it is not so much a massive ideological transformation that brought the people together, and that is something that we have to do, because the structural underpinnings of these divisions are still there. Our education system has to be transformed. Our media has to be transformed. So the point is that we have a long way to go to make sure that what we have achieved today in terms of transcending these divisions has to be sustained. Now,
I agree with you, so that it was equal destitution that brought probably everyone together. But I also see a more intelligent ideological shift happening. Like if you take Golface, for example, May 18th, they commemorated the death of everyone, of all ethnicities who died that day, as opposed to only one ethnicity being given permission to commemorate. So I think though it may have started with, for once, everybody being treated equally in lack, right? There is also now within that space a growing ideological shift, which I see with, the inclusion of artists and everyone coming in, where everybody is saying, no, enough now, let's stand together. So I hope, as you say, there could be sustenance through a revamping of education and all that. Though a word you had used in this book is utopian. And you actually had given some answers into some of the problems that we have, which you discussed in a little here. A utopian ideal, we can get back there if we do these things. And I think education very much is one of the things we have to concentrate, especially during the primary school years. And
yeah, let me finish by saying that that there is a thing called a thing called interests on the one hand and ideas on the other. Societies are driven by a combination of both. You have ideas and interest, driving societies and individuals forward or backward. Now here, the interest, that is, the crisis actually, created the conditions under which everybody had to deal with, their day-to-day lives. But at the same time, it has given rise to a discourse that is, basically giving rise to very progressive ideas. So ideas will take over, because ideas are important, and ideas are not just utopian anymore, because people realize that we are one, and that we have to shed our differences. We have to learn to live with each other, work, basically get on with our lives, together, and so on and so forth. And we are faced with a set of common problems that we all face. And, for instance, this whole governance issue is something that everybody is talking about. People say that we need reformed institutions, we need new policies, we need an entirely new state in Sri Lanka. It is not the kind of state that we have been quite used to over the years. So the point is that we are, I think, ready for a transformation. And I think that is the message that is coming out of a lot of these, let's say, movements, if you like. I think that is a good sign. So, but the fact of the matter is that that our interests are as important as our ideas and vice versa. So it is a balance that really matters here. And I hope that we would be able to really do justice to both the interests and ideas, because survival is, is important for everyone, but survival alone is not enough, because we have to really, take the other people also on board and with us, and that we have to move together, let's say move forward together in order to bring about change and create conditions that are really conducive for all of us to live in a decent way in the country from now on.
Sir, having people like you talk about idealism and utopia like that is a sign of hope, because it's not giving up. There are ways out if we only do this now. I wanted to ask you, now this was a series of articles in English. Is there a similar thing in Sinhala, sir? Did you write in Sinhala?
It's translated. It was translated. It was translated into Sinhala some time back. But the point is that because of various other obligations and other constraints, Sinhala book is not published yet. In fact, I have on my table the manuscript, which I have to really return to the publisher, that is Sarasavi. And the Tamil version was already out, 3-4 years ago. Tamil translation was published, but the Sinhala one will be out soon. I do not know.
What is it called, sir?
It's called Sihimat Samaja Kara.
I see.
Sihimat Samaja Kara.
Right. This, of course, is available at Sarasavi, which is where I got it from. So thank you, sir, for, the fact that even with all the troubles happening, you can see a way out. We can change. If we change education, and you're seeing positivity in people coming together now, despite the racial divisions. And you have analyzed, as someone who has seen for the last 50 or so years, the way the society has moved. It gives us hope to have you come here and speak with us. So I'm very grateful for that. And also, let's hope someone hears calls by people like you who say it's crucial that we let free the institutions and the commissions that were set up way before to help with the exact problems we are dealing with now. If only they had been let free to do their work, and if only people who were trained in these particular fields were given freedom to work without political interference, because whatever said and done, the Sri Lankan institutionalized policy making had been effective if politics hadn't been, part of the process where people say, no, don't do this, do that. So if we can think of one way of depoliticizing public institutions and commissions and listening to people who don't have political agendas in backing up particular regimes, maybe we can find a way out. So do you think there will be a positive way out for Sri Lanka from this current mess that we are facing? That's my last question to you.
We have no choice. As a country, we have to find a way out, because there's no other way. I mean, we have to get out of this crisis as quickly as we can, create normalcy so that people can get on with their lives, and then to do the reforms that are urgently needed in this country. And I think that is what we should be aiming at immediately after we create certain conditions that allow people to live their lives and of course to take care of their children and youth and so on and so forth. So I think we can do it, and I know that Sri Lanka can be developed in the sustainable way. It is not a question of economic growth alone. It is a question of how we want to make sure that our development is sustainable and that it satisfies the needs of everyone, not just the privileged few, and that we should address all the issues around us in the way that we discussed in this period. So I think if we can have a decent let's say interim arrangement in the country in the next days and weeks, we would be able to steer the country out of this massive crisis, and that actually did not fall from the heavens. I always want to say that, and that should lead to change in the way that we conduct our public affairs in the long run. And I think everybody has a responsibility. Young people have come out, and I think they have come out because they have no choice again, because they want to have a future. Older people don't worry about the future because they want to survive as long as they can. But as far as young people are concerned, they have to have a future. But the most important thing is, children. Children do not know what is happening around. Children do not know what is happening around, and that's really a tragic thing. These unsuspecting small children, not knowing what is happening, are also very much affected. So it is our social responsibility to make sure that we create a better future for the younger generations, and also make sure that the children have an environment where they can grow up and pursue their life later on through education and employment and so on and so forth. And I think if we really can establish these basic principles to start with, to guide us this process of political transformation. And I have a feeling that after the next general elections, we will have a decent regime committed to these fundamental ideas that are applicable across the world. It's not just confined to this country. And I hope we will be able to get a few good people, to really give us the leadership at the highest level, committed to not instrumental values, but substantive values. That is to, really, see what is there for the others in what they are doing rather than what is there for me. I think if we can make that change, not just among politicians, but also among everybody else, in particular, I would say the academics and public officers and so on and so forth, that we all need, our own things to live. But that is not enough, because we are entrusted with the responsibility of also taking care of so many others in education, in the public administration, and so on and so forth. So I only hope that we would be able to establish these principles, cutting across all these sectors, education, the media, health, economy, and so on and so forth. I think the academics should realize that we don't need much to live a decent life. We don't need much to live a decent life. We don't have to really do what other people do. We can, we can be independent, let's say honest, academics and researchers, and we can still have what other people have and more. And I think that is what I want to emphasize, because we should realize that we don't need much to live a decent life, and that is my realization after all these years. And I'm quite happy that I have what I need, not what I really crave for, because I don't have any big cravings anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I will meet you again with the Sinhala interview. And thank you so much for your time this Sunday morning, talking to me and discussing pressing questions that are in my mind, I think, and in many people's mind, because the sociological, the academic perspective does help when things are look as if they are spiraling out of control right now. Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.